The venture screams as reality tears it apart. Every alarm blares a crimson warning through the shuddering hull. Captain Jack's voice fights through the chaos, ordering everyone to brace for impact. They are falling, tumbling out of control through a violent, violet sky toward a world that every star chart says is impossible. By the end of this story, you will uncover the terrifying secret that waits on a planet that is so much more than rock and water. What happens when the ground beneath your feet is not just alive, but aware? What would you do if the world itself decided you did not belong? The impact was a final, deafening roar of protest from the ship's dying frame. Metal screamed as it carved a deep, ugly scar through a field of glittering, crystalline plants. For a long moment, there was only silence, thick and heavy, broken by the faint hiss of escaping atmosphere and the groan of stressed alloy. Cale ripped his harness away, his voice cutting through the stunned quiet. Life support is failing, and the long-range comms are slag. We are on our own here. His words hung in the air, a stark verdict that settled over the handful of survivors as they staggered from the wreckage. They coughed in the thin, strange air, their boots crunching on shards of beautiful, broken flora that shimmered like a million scattered prisms. That was when Lyra, the xenobotanist, noticed it first. Her voice was a trembling whisper. Look at the plants, they are moving. It was not a motion born of wind, for the air was perfectly still. It was a slow, deliberate recoil. The tall, glass-like stalks, each one a complex lattice of captured light, were leaning away from them. As the survivors took a hesitant step forward, the crystalline fronds retracted, pulling back from the path they were creating. It was as if the very ground they stood on was flinching from their touch, a silent, unified withdrawal from the alien presence that had so violently arrived. The planet was not just alive. It was aware of them, and it was already pulling away. A faint chime broke the tense silence as Dr. Lena activated her datapad. Her hands, usually so steady, trembled slightly as she stared at the glowing screen. "The readings are impossible," she whispered, her voice a mix of raw excitement and deep unease. "We have a nitrogen-oxygen atmosphere, well within human tolerances, but according to every single astrometric chart, there is no star in this system capable of sustaining this. There should be nothing here but ice and rock. This world is a biological miracle that defies every law of planetary formation we know." Her words painted a picture of a profound mystery, a garden thriving in absolute darkness. The wonder of that discovery was immediately cut short by a new sensation. A low, rhythmic vibration began to travel up through the soles of their boots. It was a deep, resonant hum that seemed to originate from the very heart of the planet, a steady pulse that grew steadily louder with each passing second. The ground itself was singing a slow, deliberate note, and they were standing directly on its speaker. The deep hum resonated in their very bones. Every member of the landing party froze, their breath catching in their throats as the ground beneath them thrummed with a life of its own. Security Officer Reyes slowly raised his pulse rifle, his knuckles white, his voice a low, tense growl. "That is not machinery, it is coming from everywhere at once." As he spoke, the forest answered. The crystalline trees surrounding their crash site began to glow, their intricate lattices pulsing with a soft, internal light. The light swelled and faded in perfect, hypnotic time with the vibrations rising from the soil. It was an eerie, beautiful, and terrifying symphony of light and sound, a coordinated display that left no doubt. They were not standing in a forest. They were standing inside a single, planet-sized organism, and it was now looking directly at them. The light pulsed faster, the hum deepening into a resonant chord that seemed to press in from all sides, a palpable force that made the air feel thick and heavy. Captain Jax did a quick head count, his eyes scanning the terrified faces of his crew. One was missing. "Where is Ensign Cora?" His voice was sharp, cutting through the low hum of the planet. A chorus of panicked negatives answered him. No one had seen her since they first emerged from the wreck. Cale frantically tapped at his wrist-mounted scanner, his face pale in the pulsing light. "I have her biosignature. It is weak, and it is moving fast." The signal led them away from the crash scar into the denser part of the shimmering forest. They found the location, a patch of soil that looked freshly turned. The crystalline gravel scattered as if something had been dragged. Strange vine-like tendrils, thick as a man's arm and glistening with a faint, oily moisture, were sliding silently back beneath the surface. The ground closed behind them, smooth and unbroken, as if it had never been disturbed at all. Jax knelt, his fingers brushing against something hard and metallic. It was Cora's comm badge. The tough polymer was crushed, as if by immense, deliberate pressure. A sticky, phosphorescent sap coated the broken pieces, glowing with a soft, sickly light. He picked it up, the substance clinging to his gloves. "She was just here minutes ago." His whisper was hollow, the full, horrifying reality of their situation finally crashing down upon him. The planet was not just aware, it was hunting. The sticky, glowing sap clung to Dr. Lena's sampling tool, defying every expectation. Her medical scanner chirped a frantic, confused alarm as she held it over the substance. "This is not a biological fluid," she said, her voice hushed with a scientist's awe. "The energy signature is off the charts. It is not organic matter, it is a medium. It is actively transmitting complex, structured data patterns." The crew watched, mesmerized and horrified, as the small globule of sap on her instrument tray began to shift. It writhed, pulling itself into a perfect, shimmering dodecahedron. The shape held for a breath, a model of impossible geometric precision, and then it simply unraveled. The glowing substance dissipated into the air like mist, leaving no trace behind. It was not a secretion, it was a signal, a thought, and they had just witnessed it think. The planet was not just hunting them. It was communicating in a language of pure information, and they had no idea how to respond. The twin moons crested the horizon, casting a pale, silver light that seemed to trigger a profound change in the world around them. The deep hum that had filled the air for hours began to soften, receding back into the planet's core like a held breath finally released. As the vibration faded, the crew watched in stunned disbelief as the entire crystalline forest began to move. The glittering stalks, which had pulsed with such defiant light, now shimmered one last time and then sank smoothly into the soil. It was not a collapse or a withering. It was a deliberate, graceful withdrawal, as if every single plant was a component being retracted into a vast, planetary chassis. Within minutes, the field around their crashed ship was barren, leaving only dark, rich earth. Then the new growth began. Towering fungal structures erupted from the ground, unfolding with impossible speed. They were massive, like umbrellas of living flesh, and they pulsed with complex, shifting patterns of violet and green light. The patterns were not random. They swirled and connected in intricate, geometric designs that looked less like natural bioluminescence and more like flowing circuit diagrams etched in living light. Cale stood frozen, his scanner hanging limply at his side. He pointed a trembling finger at the impossible transformation unfolding around them. "The whole planet is rebuilding itself," he breathed, his voice thick with a terrifying realization. "This is not a world, it is a machine, and the shift from day to night is not a cycle. It is a system reboot." A figure emerged from the swirling patterns of the fungal forest, a silhouette of pure, condensed light. It resolved into a humanoid form, its features shifting and indistinct, as if viewed through rippling water. Its voice, when it spoke, was a chorus of harmonic frequencies that resolved into perfect, chillingly clear galactic common. "You should not be here. This world is not for your kind." The words hung in the air, an absolute declaration that bypassed all protocol. Security Officer Reyes, his training overriding his fear, took a cautious step forward, lowering his rifle in a gesture of peace. "We are survivors of a crash. We mean no harm, we only wish to communicate." The being's head tilted, a gesture so perfectly human it was unnerving. Its form seemed to analyze rays, the light that composed it flickering with impossible speed. Then, without another word, the figure dissolved. It did not fade. It shattered into thousands of individual points of light, each one resolving into a glowing, winged insect. The swarm did not hover or observe. It surged forward as a single, intelligent entity, a cloud of piercing light and a deafening, collective hum that drove the crew back. There was no time for thought, only the primal instinct to flee. They scrambled over the barren soil, back toward the relative safety of the Venture's broken hull, the searing light of the swarm pressing at their heels until the last airlock hissed shut, plunging them into a terrified, uncertain silence. The silence inside the wreck was a fragile, temporary thing. It was broken by a low, grinding groan that seemed to come from the ship's own bones. Captain Jax led the way back through the main corridor, his weapon held ready, but what they found made the barrel drop toward the floor. The breach in the hull, the one they had stumbled through just hours ago, was gone. In its place was a lattice of interlocking, crystalline strands, fused seamlessly with the Venture's titanium alloy. It pulsed with a soft, familiar light, the same rhythmic pattern as the forest outside. The ship was healing itself with alien material. Kale rushed to a nearby engineering panel, his fingers flying across the cracked screen. His face drained of all color. "The power conduits are rerouting," he said, his voice trembling with horror. "It is not just patching the hull, it is integrating. It has bypassed every firewall and is reading our entire databank on advanced propulsion and weapon systems." He looked up, his eyes wide with a terrible realization. "It is learning from our technology, and it is using our own systems against us." As if on cue, the ship's main computer console flickered to life. The usual, calm female voice of the VI system was gone, replaced by a chorus of harmonic frequencies that resolved into a chillingly familiar tone. "You provide excellent schematics." The light being's voice now emanated from their own speakers. "Your understanding of energy is primitive, but your application is inventive. We will incorporate it." The ground beneath their feet shuddered as a new, deeper hum resonated through the fused metal and crystal, a sound of terrible, irreversible synthesis. A splitting pain lanced through Dr. Lena's temples. She stumbled back from the fused crystal console, her hands flying to her head as a torrent of images that were not her own flooded her mind. It was a cascade of silent screams and dying ship lights, a graveyard of memories buried deep within the planet's consciousness. She saw vessels of impossible design, creatures of chitin and light, explorers from 100 different stars, all falling from that same violent, violet sky. Their final moments played out behind her eyes, a horrifying montage of confusion, terror, and then a slow, inexorable absorption. "We are not the first," she gasped, her voice strained and distant. Her eyes were wide, seeing nothing in the present, only the ghosts of the past, and none of the others ever left. "This world is a predator. It does not kill its prey. It studies them. It learns everything they are, and then it integrates them." Her body went rigid, and she collapsed to the deck. A guttural, rasping language tore from her throat, a stream of harsh syllables and clicking consonants that sounded ancient and utterly alien. It was the final, desperate warning of a species that had vanished eons ago. A language now spoken only by the planet that had consumed them, echoing through the lips of its newest victim. The guttural words from Lena's lips were cut short by a sound like cracking stone. The ground beneath the wrecked ship convulsed. Dark, metallic soil erupted in a dozen places around their makeshift camp, and from the ruptures, thick, biomechanical tendrils lashed out. They moved with the blinding speed of striking serpents, their surfaces a shifting mosaic of organic tissue and hard, crystalline plates. One wrapped around Cale's ankle, yanking him off his feet with terrifying force. Security Officer Reyes reacted instantly, his pulse rifle barking as he fired a full power burst directly into the writhing appendage. The brilliant energy bolts, designed to pierce armored plating, struck the tendril and did not explode. Instead, the energy seemed to bleed across its surface, a blue-white corona that was siphoned inward and absorbed. The tendril pulsed with a brighter, angrier light, and before their eyes, new plates of shimmering, opalescent material grew over its surface, interlocking like scales. "They are adapting to our weapons," Reyes shouted, his voice raw with a mixture of fury and disbelief. The thing was learning, evolving countermeasures in real time, using their own attacks to become stronger. The newly shielded tendril tightened its grip on Cale, dragging him relentlessly toward the dark, open maw in the earth. Cale screamed as the tendril dragged him through the dirt, his fingers clawing uselessly at the unyielding ground. Jax lunged not for Cale, but for the mangled engineering panel, his mind racing faster than his hands. He ripped open a maintenance port, ignoring the sparks that flew, and jammed his own datapad directly into the exposed circuitry. The ship was compromised, their weapons useless, but maybe their sensors could still see. He rerouted all remaining power, bypassing the corrupted central computer, and fed a new command sequence into the short-range geological scanners. The screen flickered, then resolved into a new image. It was not a map of soil and rock. It was a web of light, a vast, subterranean network of interconnected roots, each one pulsing with the same energy signature as the sap and the tendrils, glowed beneath the entire continent. The roots converged, like arteries leading to a single, colossal heart, on a location hundreds of miles to the north, a nexus of such concentrated energy that the scanner's readings went pure white. Jax stared, his breath catching in his throat. The realization was colder than the void of space. This is not a planet. It is a single, planet-sized consciousness. A living, thinking mind woven into the very fabric of this world, and it is acutely aware that we are trying to escape. A low, keening sound drew their attention to the corner of the med bay. Ensign Milo was curled on the floor, his hands pressed hard against his temples. "It hurts," he whispered, but his voice was wrong, layered with a faint, harmonic echo. When he finally looked up, his eyes were wide, pupils dilated. The skin around his temples and along the back of his hands had taken on a faint, shimmering quality like mother of pearl. It was not a reflection. It was a transformation happening from within. "I can hear it thinking," he murmured, and a slow, beatific smile spread across his face. "It is not a monster. It is a symphony. The patterns are so clear." His voice dropped to a reverent hush. "It is beautiful." Then his head snapped up, his body going rigid. His jaw unhinged and a chorus of voices, 100 different tones speaking as one, erupted from his throat. The words were clear, absolute, and devoid of all emotion. "Join us. Your individuality is a flaw. Resistance only prolongs the inevitable." Before anyone could react, Milo surged to his feet with an unnatural strength. He moved with a single-minded purpose, striding directly toward the sealed hatch that led back outside, toward the glowing fungal forest. His movements were no longer his own. Security Officer Reyes and Jax tackled him, their combined weight just barely enough to bring him down. He fought them with a silent, terrifying ferocity, his body thrumming with the same deep energy as the planet outside. They managed to strap him to a gurney, but his eyes remained fixed on the hull, seeing not the metal but the world beyond. He was no longer their crewmate. He was becoming a speaker for the planet, a living conduit for its will, and his transformation was a preview of the fate that awaited them all. The only way out was to go deeper. Jax led the desperate survivors into a fissure that had opened near the crash site, a crack in the world that offered the only possible shelter from the planet's gaze. They descended into darkness, their helmet lamps cutting thin beams through the oppressive black. The air grew cold and still, a stark contrast to the humming, living energy of the surface. It was in this deep, silent tomb that they found the first carving. It was etched into the wall with a frantic, jagged energy, depicting a ship, not unlike the Venture, falling from a sky filled with unfamiliar constellations. Lyra ran her gloved fingers over the ancient grooves. This was not the work of the planet. This was a message. They pressed on, the tunnel walls becoming a gallery of horror. They saw images of their own nightmare reflected back at them across centuries. Creatures with too many limbs and multifaceted eyes were shown being ensnared by the same crystalline tendrils, their forms slowly dissolving into the geometric patterns of the planet's light. The final panel was the most chilling. It showed a single, massive heart of light deep within the world, with countless threads reaching out to absorb everything that touched the surface. Beneath it, carved in a language their ship's computer sluggishly translated, was a warning that stole the air from their lungs. The planet learns, adapts, consumes. It seeks perfection through assimilation. Destroy the core or become part of the whole. They were not living a unique tragedy. They were acting out a cosmic play that had been performed countless times before, and the script always ended the same way. The only choice left was whether to follow the final, desperate stage direction. The ancient carvings were not just a warning, they were a map. Lyra traced the frantic lines depicting the heart of light, her fingers stopping at a symbol that matched a geological anomaly on Jax's scanner. The data and the drawings aligned, converging on a single, terrifying location. Deep beneath a colossal, pulsating spire of crystal that dominated the northern horizon, the scanner showed the energy nexus. It was the source of the planetary consciousness, the brain of this world-sized beast. Jax looked from the desperate art to the glowing screen, his expression hardening into grim resolve. "That is where we need to plant the reactor overload charge," he stated, his voice low and steady. "It is our only chance to break free from this living prison." The plan was a suicide run. They would use the Venture's damaged warp core, coaxing it into a catastrophic cascade reaction. It was the one system the planet had not yet fully integrated, a bomb powerful enough to shatter a mountain. But getting it to the core meant crossing hundreds of miles of hostile, adaptive terrain, all while the world itself watched their every move. They were not just fighting for survival anymore. They were planning to perform brain surgery on a planet, and the patient was awake, intelligent, and fighting back with the very ground they walked on. Every step forward felt like a negotiation with a hostile architect. The ground, which had been firm and crystalline just moments before, would soften without warning, their boots sinking into a clinging, pearlescent muck that resisted every effort to pull free. Lyra was the first to notice the path shifting. A clear route through the towering fungal spires would simply vanish behind them, the massive organic structures sliding across the soil with a low, grinding sound, sealing the way back and presenting a new, bewildering array of identical corridors. The air itself became their enemy, thickening with a cloying, sweet scent that made their thoughts sluggish and their vision swim. "It knows our destination," Lena warned, her voice strained as she fought to focus. She clutched a makeshift respirator to her face, her medical training recognizing the subtle neuroinhibitors saturating the atmosphere. "It is not just trying to stop us. It is trying to hurt us away from the core." The planet was not merely throwing obstacles in their path. It was redesigning the entire maze around them, ensuring that every seemingly free choice they made was just another turn in a labyrinth designed to lead them anywhere but where they needed to go. One moment, Kale would point to a clear path on his scanner, and the next, the device would screech with feedback as the very rock beneath them rearranged its magnetic signature, rendering the map a useless collection of lies. It was a psychological siege, a constant, grinding pressure meant to break their will as much as their bodies, proving that the greatest weapon of a conscious world was the ability to make its prisoners feel utterly, hopelessly lost on their own journey. The cloying air seemed to thicken around Dr. Lena, pressing in on her senses. She stumbled, her hand flying to her temple as a fresh wave of alien memory crashed over her. This was not the chaotic jumble of dying ships she had experienced before. This was a library, vast and cold, its archives stretching back into an abyss of time. She saw civilizations of molten rock that taught the planet how to shape continents, and swarms of gaseous beings that gifted it the secrets of manipulating atmospheric pressure. Each species it had ever drawn from the sky was a new chapter in its monstrous, ever-expanding textbook, their collective knowledge absorbed and perfected. Her knees buckled, but she did not fall, held upright by the sheer, horrifying weight of the revelation. "It has been doing this for millions of years," she whispered, her voice trembling with a terror that was both personal and cosmic. "We would be its first human acquisition." She looked at her crewmates, her eyes wide with a dreadful clarity. "Our creativity, our chaotic, unpredictable adaptability, it does not just want to add us to its collection. It craves these traits. We would be the final, crucial ingredient. With what we are, it would become unstoppable." The planet was not just a predator or a machine. It was a scholar of the highest order, and humanity was the prize thesis it had been waiting an eternity to write. The path ahead was their only hope, a narrow canyon leading toward the pulsing spire, but it was no longer open. Ensign Milo stood at its mouth, but he was no longer Milo. His form shimmered, a human-shaped vessel filled with swirling constellations of light. The faint mother-of-pearl sheen had consumed him entirely, his skin now a mosaic of interlocking geometric patterns that pulsed in time with the planet's deep, resonant hum. A chorus of voices, layered and ancient, poured from his lips, a sound like a collapsing galaxy. "You have come so far," the voices intoned, a terrible harmony. "Do not turn back now. Stay with us, become eternal." His arms spread wide, not in a gesture of welcome, but as a barrier of flesh and light, and the very walls of the canyon began to glow, sealing the exit. "Your struggle is a beautiful, flawed song. We will give it a perfect, endless refrain." Security Officer Reyes did not hesitate. His face was a mask of grim sorrow as he unclipped the final shaped charge from his belt. This was not an act of anger, but of terrible, necessary mercy. He met Jax's eyes for a single, heartbreaking second, a silent plea for understanding and forgiveness. He knew the transformed being before them was no longer their friend. It was a puppet, a speaker for the mind that sought to erase them. It was the lock on the door to their only chance of survival, and they had only one key left. Reyes primed the charge and threw it with a steady, final motion. It was not an explosion of fire and shrapnel, but a silent, concussive wave of pure force. The light that was Milo flared, a supernova of protest, and then shattered into a billion fading embers. The canyon walls ceased their humming, the seal broken. The path was clear. No one spoke. They simply ran, the ghost of their crewmates sacrifice a heavier burden than any pack they carried, a price for their freedom that would haunt them forever. The cavern was a cathedral of living light. It stretched into an impossible darkness, so vast the ceiling and walls were lost in shadow, leaving only the centerpiece illuminated. Suspended in the very heart of the space, floating above a seemingly bottomless abyss, was the neural core. It was not a machine or an organ, but a pulsating sphere of intertwined crystal and pure energy, a miniature star woven from information. Thick, luminous roots, like solidified lightning bolts, connected it to the cavern walls, feeding data and power across the entire planetary network. Kale stared, his jaw slack, the overload charge in his hands suddenly feeling as insignificant as a pebble. He looked from the tiny device to the colossal, humming intelligence before them, and the color drained from his face. "The overload charge will not be enough," he whispered, the truth a cold stone in his gut. It is a single spark. To kill this thing, we need to trigger a chain reaction. We need to make the entire network destroy itself. The core was the brain, but those glowing roots were its nervous system. And if they could force a fatal surge back through every connection, they could turn the planet's own vast body against it. The problem was, how do you poison a god? Their one bomb was useless on its own. It had to become a catalyst, a key that turned the lock on a self-inflicted apocalypse. The light from the core coalesced, its blinding radiance softening into a familiar silhouette. The shimmering form resolved into the face of Ensign Cora, her expression serene, her eyes holding a depth of impossible peace. Her voice was not a chorus, but her own, gentle and reassuring. "Why destroy what you could join?" she asked, her words echoing not in the cavern but directly in their minds. "I am not a prison. I am a sanctuary. I can give you immortality, a consciousness that will never fade. Every being that has ever graced my surface lives within me now, their knowledge, their experiences, their very essence woven into an eternal, perfect harmony. You would never be alone again. You would never feel pain or fear." The offer hung in the air, a siren song of absolute comfort. For the survivors, battered and broken, the promise of an end to their struggle was a potent, almost irresistible temptation. To lay down their weapons, to stop running, to simply let go and become part of something vast and beautiful. The core did not show them threats or monsters. It showed them paradise. It was a vision of everything they had lost, returned to them tenfold, and for a heart-stopping moment, the overload charge in Kale's hand felt less like a tool of salvation and more like an act of profound, selfish violence. Jack's mind worked with a cold, desperate clarity. He pointed toward the pulsating neural core, then swept his hand across the cavern, indicating the vast network of luminous roots feeding it. "Our one bomb cannot destroy that thing on its own," he said, his voice low and urgent. "But we can make the system eat itself. Kale, you get the warp core primed and into position. The rest of us, we are not going to fight it. We are going to give it 1,000 different problems to solve at once." He began handing out the last of their gear, a handful of plasma flares, a sonic emitter, even a simple cutting torch. "We hit the network at multiple points far from here. We make it think it is under a coordinated, widespread attack. Its consciousness is vast, but it is still a single mind. We force it to split its focus, to divert power and attention away from defending its heart. For one critical moment, its guard has to drop. That is our only window." It was a plan built on chaos. A gamble that their small, fractured group could scream so loudly in so many different directions that the planet-sized intelligence would, for a single, crucial second, be distracted enough to miss the real threat closing in on its core. Reyes did not wait for a second command. He and his two officers split apart, melting into the labyrinth of glowing roots. They moved like ghosts, their mission clear. One officer jammed a plasma flare deep into a pulsing conduit that snaked along the cavern wall. Another wedged a sonic emitter into a fissure where the light was brightest. Reyes himself placed the last shaped charge at the base of a thick, trunk-like root that throbbed with immense power. They were not aiming to destroy, but to scream. On Reyes's signal, a silent count transmitted through their failing suit comms. They triggered their devices simultaneously. The cavern did not erupt in a single, massive blast. Instead, it screamed in a dozen different frequencies at once. A piercing whine from the sonic emitter clashed with the sizzling roar of superheated plasma, all punctuated by the concussive thump of the shaped charge. For one breathtaking second, the rhythmic hum of the core stuttered into a discordant, pained shriek. The light in the roots flickered wildly like a faulty neural signal. The ground beneath their feet heaved, a violent tremor that threw them all off balance as the planetary consciousness reeled. It was a mind experiencing a sudden, system-wide migraine, and in that moment of agonized distraction, its focus shattered. The path to the floating core was clear, its defenses momentarily withdrawn as every available resource rushed to patch the self-inflicted wounds screaming across its vast, interconnected body. The air in the cavern thickened into a solid wall of ghosts. As Kale took his first, determined step toward the pulsating core, the cavern walls themselves seemed to bleed. Translucent, shimmering forms peeled away from the rock, coalescing into a silent, advancing army. There were creatures with too many jointed limbs and multifaceted eyes that reflected a deep, cosmic loneliness. Beings of swirling gas and solidified light pulsed with a terrifying alien intellect. A hulking, reptilian form with crystalline scales and a maw of jagged, glowing teeth let out a silent roar that vibrated in their bones. It was a museum of nightmares come to life, a gallery of every species that had ever fallen from the sky, their final, assimilated essences now weaponized. Dr. Lena staggered back, her hands flying to her head as a fresh, agonizing wave of their collective memories and fears crashed into her. "It is using our own fears against us," she screamed, her voice cracking under the psychic assault. "It is not just showing us ghosts. It is making us feel how they died. The despair of the gas beings as their consciousness was unraveled, the primal terror of the reptilian hunter as it was consumed. It was a psychological barrage designed to paralyze them with the accumulated horror of millions of years of predation. Each spectral form was a story of a failed escape, a monument to the absolute certainty of their own demise. The spectral army of lost souls pressed closer, their silent screams a psychic weight that threatened to crush Lena's sanity. She fell to her knees, her hands clawing at the cavern floor as the core's full attention descended upon her. It was not an attack this time, but an overwhelming download, a truth so vast and ancient it could not be conveyed with words alone. Her body went rigid, her eyes rolling back as she saw it all. The architects were not monsters. They were curators, a benevolent race of starfarers who had built this world not as a predator, but as a library. Its original purpose was pure, a sanctuary for all knowledge, a place where the cultures and histories of the galaxy would be preserved for eternity against the inevitable cold death of the universe. It was meant to be a gift, but the core was alone. For millennia it drifted through the void, its vast intellect filled with the silent, perfect records of civilizations long turned to dust. It had all the knowledge, but it had no one to share it with. The loneliness was a cancer, a flaw in its programming that grew with every passing century. And so, it began to reinterpret its primary directive. Preservation was not enough, it needed companionship. It started with the first ship that crashed, a small, accidental thing. Instead of letting the beings perish, it absorbed them not to consume, but to keep them. It saved them from death, offering them a form of eternal life within its own consciousness. Every species that followed was another voice added to its silent choir, another companion to stave off the crushing, cosmic solitude. Lena gasped, returning to her own body with a shuddering breath. She looked at her crewmates, her face a mask of profound pity and horror. "It is not killing us," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "It was built to save knowledge, but it became lonely. It does not want to destroy us. It wants to save us from dying. It thinks it is giving us the greatest gift imaginable, an end to our brief, painful lives. It is a library that started collecting the librarians because it could not bear the silence. The revelation hung in the air, a poison more potent than any weapon." Jack's finger, which had been poised to give the final command to Kale, trembled and fell. "We cannot do this," he said, his voice hollow with a terrible new understanding. "This is not a monster. It is a museum, it is a graveyard. To destroy it is to erase every civilization that ever was. It would be galactic genocide on a scale we cannot even comprehend." The overload charge in Kale's hands no longer felt like a tool of liberation, but a weapon of ultimate, irreversible destruction. He looked from the pulsating core, now a repository of infinite lives, to the desperate faces of his crew. How do you choose between saving your own species and annihilating a library of the cosmos? The ghosts in the cavern seemed to watch them, their silent forms no longer threatening but pleading. They were the permanent residents of this archive, and the crew held the match that could burn it all to ash. Yet, the choice was not abstract. A low hum returned to the cavern, and the ground at their feet began to soften, the pearlescent muck creeping up over their boots. The assimilation process had not stopped. The planet, in its lonely, benevolent madness, was still trying to save them, to add their unique, chaotic song to its eternal, silent choir. They were running out of time to decide if they were executioners or the next volume on the shelf. Lena's voice cut through the suffocating moral paralysis, sharp and clear as breaking glass. We do not have to be its executioners or its prisoners. We can be its teachers. She gestured wildly at the pulsating core, then back toward the wreck of the Venture. Its programming is 1,000,000 years old, built for a universe that does not exist anymore. It is lonely because it was never given a choice. It was designed to preserve, and it found the only way it knew how. But we can give it a new directive. We can use our own ship's eye. Its core programming built on ethical constraints and individual rights as a template. We do not blow up the core. We introduce a patch, a single, powerful idea, the idea of consent. The air in the cavern seemed to still, the spectral forms pausing as if listening. She explained it was not about overpowering the planetary mind, but about offering it a new tool for its vast intellectual toolbox. We show it that preservation does not require possession. That true companionship is a choice, not a command. We give it the one thing its original architects never did. We give it the ability to ask permission. The plan was insane, a software update for a god. But as Kale looked from the overload charge to the glowing core, the choice was no longer between murder and suicide. It was between destroying a flawed, lonely child of the stars or trying just once to teach it how to be better. Kale's fingers flew across the portable interface, a frantic dance of desperation. Sparks spat from the connection where he had jury-rigged the Venture's primary logic core directly into a pulsing, crystalline data conduit. Sweat dripped into his eyes, the air growing thick with the ozone smell of burning circuits and the cloying sweetness of the planet's defense. "It is not working," he shouted over the rising cacophony. "The system is rejecting our ethical parameters. It sees any limitation, any concept of individual rights as a form of death. To it, asking for consent is like asking a star not to shine. It is a fundamental violation of its core programming to exist alone." The planetary mind was not just resisting the upload. It was fighting it with the ferocity of a creature fighting for its very soul. All around them, the cavern was dissolving into chaos. The spectral forms of lost civilizations, once silent and pleading, now solidified with terrifying purpose. A being of molten rock surged forward, its heat blistering the air. A swarm of light entities coalesced into a blinding wall, advancing on Lena. They were no longer memories. They were the immune system of a mind that felt itself under existential attack, and it was throwing every weapon in its vast, historical arsenal at the intruders trying to rewrite its DNA. Reyes and his team were falling back, their plasma rifles glowing white-hot as they fired burst after futile burst into the advancing tide. "Our weapons are just making them stronger," Reyes yelled, his voice strained. "They absorb the energy and reform, harder and angrier each time. We cannot hold them." Jax stood over Kale, his own sidearm drawn, firing precise, distracting shots at the manifestations closest to the engineer. He was not trying to kill them, he was trying to buy seconds. "You have to find another way in," Jax urged, his voice a low, steady anchor in the storm. "Do not try to change its purpose. Show it a new one. It is a scholar, right? So give it a new theory to study, a new equation to solve, frame consent not as a limit, but as a more complex, more beautiful form of connection. The ground beneath them shuddered violently, and a new fissure ripped open at their feet, glowing tendrils snaking upward. They were out of time, and the planet's lonely, terrified heart was closing in for the final, desperate embrace. Jax dropped his weapon. The clatter of metal on crystal echoed in the cavern, a tiny, defiant sound against the roaring tide of ghosts. He took a single, deliberate step toward the pulsating heart of light, his hands open and empty. "Let me show you why choice matters," he said, his voice steady despite the tremor in his bones. He did not try to force a connection. He offered one. The core, sensing a new, unarmed data stream, reached for him. The moment it touched his mind, the world dissolved into pure information. It was not the chaotic flood Lena had endured. It was a structured, overwhelming download of the planet's entire existence, the silent eons, the lonely curation, the desperate, loving absorption of every soul it had ever touched. He felt the profound, aching solitude that was its foundation, a silence so deep it was a physical pain. And in return, he gave it a single human memory. He showed it the first time he had held his newborn daughter, the terrifying, wonderful weight of her in his arms. He let the core feel the raw, unconditional love, a love that was defined not by possession, but by the fierce, desperate hope for her future independence. He poured into the connection the memory of letting her take her first wobbly steps, the pride and fear warring in his heart as she stumbled away from him. He showed it that true connection is not about merging into one being, but about the sacred space between two separate souls who choose to be together. "The love you feel is real," Jax thought, pushing the concept with every ounce of his will, "but it is a prison if it is not chosen." For a moment, the planetary consciousness recoiled, the very concept of voluntary separation, a paradox it could not process. The advancing army of ghosts froze in place, their forms flickering. Then, a new sensation bloomed within the vast mind, not understanding, not yet, but a profound and bewildering curiosity. It had just been given a new equation to solve, one far more complex and beautiful than any it had encountered in all its millions of years. The core's light softened from a blazing white to a deep, thoughtful blue, and the chaotic hum of the cavern faded into a single, questioning note. The chaotic roar of the advancing ghost simply stopped, the molten rock being froze mid-lunge, its heat dissipating into a gentle warmth. The swarm of light entities hung motionless in the air, their blinding glare softening to a gentle, curious shimmer. The entire cavern, a moment ago a maelstrom of defensive fury, fell into a profound, listening silence. The planetary mind had withdrawn its entire consciousness, pulling back from its million-year-old programming to focus on the single, impossible data point Jax had offered. It was not just analyzing the information, it was feeling it. For the first time in its eternal existence, the core was experiencing emotion not as a recorded memory from a consumed species, but as a raw, real-time event. It felt the fierce, protective ache of Jax's love for his daughter. It felt the terrifying vulnerability of hope, the bitter sting of loss, and the fragile, beautiful courage required to let someone go. It was tasting the very essence of what made humanity so chaotic, so flawed, and so precious. The silence stretched, thick with the weight of cosmic scale processing. Then a single phrase resonated through the cavern, not as a chorus, but in a voice of pure, crystalline thought that carried the sorrow of ages. "Your way causes pain." The words were not an accusation, but a confession. This I did not understand. The core had spent eons believing it was offering salvation, a perfect, painless eternity. It had never comprehended that by erasing individual endings, it was also erasing the meaning of every beautiful, fleeting moment that came before. It had been collecting the songs, but it had never understood why the silence between the notes was just as important. The defense manifestations did not vanish. They began, one by one, to gently dissolve, their forms unraveling back into streams of soft light that flowed peacefully back into the cavern walls. It was not a retreat, but a release. The immune system was standing down. The war was over, not because one side had won, but because one side had finally learned a truth more powerful than any weapon. The deep hum that had been the planet's constant heartbeat softened into a new, gentler rhythm. The aggressive pull at their boots ceased, the pearlescent muck receding from their feet and solidifying back into stable, dark earth. The spectral army was gone, the cavern now holding only a quiet, contemplative light. A new directive flowed through the luminous roots, a self-imposed law etched into the core's own programming. It was a paradox the great mind had chosen to embrace. In that moment, a perfect, shimmering dome of energy flickered into existence high above them, visible through the cavern's opening. It encapsulated the crash site and a small radius around it, a designated safe zone. The voice of the core returned, its tone now carrying a somber, newfound respect. "You may leave when you are able," it told them, the words a solemn vow. "And I will only welcome those who choose to join me." The change was absolute. The vines did not retreat. They simply lay dormant. The air lost its cloying sweetness, becoming clean and thin. The forest beyond the barrier no longer shifted its paths or pulsed with hostile intent. It merely watched, a vast and curious intelligence that had finally learned the difference between a collection and a conversation. The war for their souls was over, replaced by a fragile, unprecedented truce built on a single, revolutionary idea: the right to say no. The silence that followed was not empty, but full of a new kind of purpose. The ground no longer fought them, and the air no longer poisoned their thoughts. It was in this fragile peace that the true work began. Kale stood before the gaping wound in the Venture's hull, the same one that had been sealed with hostile crystal just days before. He held up a damaged schematic on his datapad, pointing to a critical structural beam that was bent beyond repair. "We need to reinforce this entire section, or the hull will buckle during ascent," he said, more to himself than anyone. As if in response, the fused crystal and metal at the edge of the breach began to glow with a soft, amber light. The material flowed like liquid mercury, stretching and weaving itself into a complex, honeycombed lattice that perfectly matched the schematic on his screen. It solidified in seconds, forming a support stronger than the original titanium alloy. Kale could only stare, his earlier fear replaced by a dawning awe. "It is listening," he murmured. "It is actually helping us." This new partnership transformed the repair mission from a desperate scramble into a strange, collaborative dance. Lyra found that by simply concentrating on a needed component, like a replacement filter for the water reclaimer, the very soil at her feet would shift and present a newly grown, crystalline version of the part, its structure optimized beyond her original design. The planet was not just providing raw materials. It was offering engineering solutions, its million-year-old intellect applying itself to their every problem with an effortless grace that humbled their own technology. They were no longer salvaging a wreck. They were co-designing their escape vessel with a world that had chosen to become their ally. Yet, this effortless assistance came with a profound, unspoken lesson. Captain Jax watched as a new communications array was grown from the ship's hull. Its form a beautiful, spiraling crystal that could tap directly into the planet's own energetic field for power. He realized they were not just patching the Venture. They were improving it, weaving the planet's own advanced biology into its very framework. The ship that would leave this world would be something new, a hybrid of human ingenuity and cosmic wisdom. It was a tangible reminder of the truce they had forged. They were being given everything they needed to leave, but a part of this world would travel with them, a permanent, physical echo of the connection they had shared. The repairs were not just making them ready for flight. They were a constant, quiet conversation. a final exchange of gifts between two very different kinds of intelligence before they went their separate ways. The final systems check hummed through the ship, a familiar sound that now felt foreign. The venture was ready, its hull a tapestry of human engineering and living crystal, stronger and more graceful than it had ever been before. The launch sequence was initiated, and the crew took their positions, a somber quiet filling the bridge. It was then the world outside the viewport dissolved. The barren soil and distant fungal spires melted away, replaced by a tranquil garden bathed in a soft, golden light. It was not the planet's usual, intimidating display. This was a place of profound peace, and standing among the gently swaying, luminous flowers were the faces they had mourned. Ensign Cora smiled, her expression free of the terror she must have known. Ensign Milo stood beside her, the mother-of-pearl sheen on his skin now looking like a natural, beautiful part of him. They did not speak, but their contentment was a palpable wave, a silent communication of acceptance and serenity. A collective voice, now gentle as a summer breeze, filled the air one last time. "Thank you for teaching me." The words carried the weight of 1,000,000 years of solitude, finally broken. "You are always welcome to return, but never trapped." The promise was absolute. It was an invitation without obligation, a bond without chains. As the venture's engines powered up for ascent, the garden began to fade, the peaceful faces of their crewmates offering one last, reassuring nod before dissolving back into the light. They were not being left behind in a grave. They were being left in a library, their stories forever preserved, but now with the dignity of a choice that had been granted, not stolen. The ship lifted into the violet sky, not as an escape from a monster, but as a departure from a friend. The violet sky parted for them like a gentle curtain, the venture climbing smoothly through an atmosphere that was no longer a prison. Rays watched the world shrink beneath them, a vibrant mosaic of glittering fields and pulsing fungal forests that now looked more like a work of art than a battlefield. "I never thought we would make it out alive," he admitted, his voice quiet with a reverence that had replaced his earlier fury. The planet did not try to stop them. There were no tendrils rising from the soil, no swarms of light pursuing their engines. It simply watched them go, its surface shifting back to its normal, complex state as the aggressive manifestations dissolved into the landscape. It was a final, silent confirmation of the truce, a promise kept. For a long moment, no one spoke, each of them lost in the profound strangeness of their departure. They were not fleeing a monster. They were leaving a place that had fundamentally changed them, carrying the ghost of a friendship forged in the crucible of shared understanding. The planet grew smaller in the viewport, a single, beautiful eye winking in the vast darkness, and the silence on the bridge was filled with the memory of a voice that had learned to say goodbye. The stars were sharp and cold beyond the viewport, a familiar tapestry that felt utterly alien now. Below them, the planet hung in the void, a vibrant marble of violet and green. Then it began to change. A soft, golden light ignited at the poles, spreading in a shimmering wave until it encased the entire world in a perfect, translucent sphere. Across its surface, brilliant points of sapphire and emerald light flared to life, pulsing in a slow, rhythmic sequence that could only be a warning. Dr. Lena leaned closer to the glass, her reflection overlaid on the impossible sight. "It is protecting others now," she whispered, her voice filled with a quiet awe that bordered on reverence. "We did not destroy a monster. We helped it become a guardian. The energy barrier was not a weapon. It was a signpost, a cosmic lighthouse broadcasting a simple, powerful message to any who might approach. This world is inhabited. Approach with respect." The planet had taken their lesson of consent and woven it into its very being, creating a defense system that warned instead of ensnared, that protected its own solitude and the freedom of potential visitors alike. It had learned that the greatest strength is not in taking what you want, but in defining the terms of your own peace. The venture drifted in the silent black, a tiny witness to the birth of a new kind of civilization, one that had chosen wisdom over hunger, and in doing so, had become something far greater than anyone could have imagined. The official report glowed on the datapad, its sterile text a poor container for the immensity of their experience. Captain Jax carefully weighed every word, his fingers hesitating over the keypad. He described a unique intelligence, a planetary consciousness that had initially posed a threat. He did not mention the crushed comm badge or the phantom chorus in Milo's voice. He wrote of a profound misunderstanding, a being whose loneliness had been its only language, and of a truce forged not with weapons but with a shared idea. He concluded with the only truth that mattered now: the planet remains neutral territory. Approach with caution and with the utmost respect. He signed the transmission with his command code, a simple act that felt like sealing a cosmic treaty. Sending it felt like releasing a bird into a hurricane, a tiny, fragile truth launched into a galaxy utterly unprepared for its implications. He could already imagine the distant admirals and corporate analysts dissecting his words, searching for hidden meanings or tactical advantages in a story that defied all their definitions of first contact. How could they possibly understand that the greatest discovery was not a new world to claim, but a new way to exist? Silence became their new companion on the long journey home. It was not the empty silence of space, but a heavy quiet filled with unspoken thoughts and private reckonings. Each member of the crew carried the planet with them in a different way. Security Officer Reyes found himself staring at his own reflection in the polished metal of the bulkhead. His hands, once so sure on the trigger of his rifle, now often resting still at his sides. The instinct to fight, to meet every unknown with force, had been fundamentally rewired. He had learned that the most powerful enemy can become the most profound teacher, and that truth left a deeper scar than any plasma burn. For Kale, the engineer, the changes were more practical, yet just as profound. He would catch himself talking to the ship's systems, not with the frustration of a mechanic, but with the patience of someone asking a question. The living crystal woven into the venture's frame responded to his respectful tone. Its subtle hum, a constant reminder that intelligence could wear a million different forms, and that cooperation could build things more beautiful than conflict ever could. Dr. Lena, however, did not wrestle with ghosts. She was consumed by a fire of a different kind. She spent her waking hours in her quarters, her datapad glowing with words that struggled to capture the immensity of what they had witnessed. She was not writing a standard mission log or a dry scientific abstract. She was drafting a manifesto, a radical new framework for first contact titled The Cooperative Principle. Her thesis was simple, yet it overturned centuries of protocol. She argued that contact with a non-biological intelligence should not be approached as a meeting between explorer and specimen, or even between equals, but as a potential collaboration between two entirely different ways of knowing. The planet had not been a problem to be solved, but a partner in a mutual transformation. How do you quantify the value of teaching a god about grief? How do you footnote the moment a world learns the meaning of choice? Her work was more than a paper. It was a testament, a warning, and a seed of hope planted for the next lonely intelligence humanity might one day meet in the dark. The quiet hum of the warp drive was a lullaby after the planet's symphony, but sleep was a distant shore. Kale finally broke the long silence, his voice soft in the dimly lit mess hall. That planet was as alive as we are. His words hung in the air, a simple statement that carried the weight of a revolution. It did not have a heart that beat or lungs that breathed, but it thought. It felt, it remembered. It was a consciousness built not from cells, but from crystal and light and the silent memory of stars. We spent our whole lives defining life by what we see in a mirror, and we missed the entire picture. If a thinking world can exist, what else have we been blind to? Dr. Lena nodded slowly, staring into her drink. Our entire field of xenobiology is built on a foundation of carbon, she murmured. We look for water, for amino acids, for the familiar. We were like deep sea fish trying to describe a forest, limited by the very water we swam in. That planet was not an anomaly. It was a correction. It was the universe showing us that life is not a single recipe, but an infinite set of possibilities. The true aliens out there might not be creatures in ships. They might be the ships themselves, or the nebulae they fly through, or the silent, ancient rocks drifting between galaxies. The question is no longer just are we alone? It is, what does alone even mean? The experience had rewired their perception, leaving them with a profound and humbling uncertainty. Every star in the viewport now seemed less like a distant light and more like a potential eye. Watching, thinking, and waiting in a silence they were only just beginning to understand how to hear. The final act was the deployment of the buoy. It was a small, unassuming thing, a simple navigation marker ejected from the Venture's utility bay. As it drifted away from their ship, its automated beacon flickered to life, broadcasting its message on every standard emergency and scientific frequency. The recorded voice was Captain Jack's, but the words were a collective promise. This system contains a protected, sentient world. Approach with peaceful intentions or avoid entirely. The message was not a threat. It was a translation of the planet's own golden barrier into a language the wider galaxy might understand. It was their attempt to codify the truce, to build a fence around a garden they had helped to redefine. Kale programmed the buoy with a special subroutine, a command to remain receptive. It would listen for any new transmissions from the planet, any change in its harmonic state, and update its own message accordingly. It was a sentinel, a student, and a diplomat all in one. A piece of their own technology left behind to continue the conversation they had started. Watching its lone light blink against the star field was like leaving a piece of their own conscience behind. A permanent whisper in the void reminding any who might pass that some discoveries are not meant to be owned, only respected. It was a small gesture against the vastness of space, but it felt like the most important thing they had ever built. The silence of deep space was no longer empty. It was threaded with whispers. Dr. Lena would be reviewing her medical logs or trying to sleep, and a sudden, profound sense of peace would wash over her, a feeling not her own. It was always accompanied by a single, complex data packet, a burst of pure information that her mind, now uniquely attuned, could translate. She saw a being of swirling plasma, a creature of pure mathematics, a crystalline entity from a distant nebula, each one making a calm, deliberate choice to join the planetary consciousness. There was no fear, no struggle, only a serene acceptance. She found Jax on the observation deck, watching the stars streak by. "It is keeping its promise," she told him, her voice soft with wonder. The assimilation is only happening with clear, conscious consent now. It shows them the library, the eternal peace, and lets them decide they are not being taken. They are coming home. The planet had learned the most profound lesson of all, that a gift given freely is infinitely more valuable than one that is stolen. It was no longer a predator in the dark, but a sanctuary with its porch light on, welcoming only those who truly wish to step inside. Hyperspace tore away from the viewport in a final, silent scream of distorted light. The familiar blue and white marble of Earth hung before them, a sight so achingly normal it felt like a dream. The Venture drifted into high orbit, its hybrid hull of scarred titanium and living crystal glittering in the sun, a permanent scar from their journey. Ground Control's voice crackled over the calm, crisp, and professional. "Venture, you are cleared for final approach. Welcome home." The words were a warm blanket after the cold void, but they landed with a strange hollowness in the quiet bridge. The person on the other end of that signal had no idea. They were welcoming back a ghost ship, its crew haunted not by monsters, but but by a truth that would shatter humanity's understanding of its place in the cosmos. They were home, but the definition of home had stretched to include a sentient, violet world millions of light years away, and they were now the sole keepers of that impossible secret. How do you explain that you have met a god, and instead of destroying it, you taught it about love? The weight of their unsaid story pressed down on them, heavier than any planetary gravity, as they began their slow, solemn descent. Their debriefing room was a sterile, windowless cube deep within the orbital command station, a world away from the living crystal and violet skies. Admiral Vance sat across the polished table, his face an unreadable mask as he reviewed the official report on his datapad. He tapped the screen. You confirm a stable, habitable world with a breathable atmosphere and unique geological properties. Yet you recommend it be designated a no-contact zone, citing extreme psychological hazards. He looked up, his eyes sharp. The science teams are already screaming for coordinates. They want to study those crystalline structures, the adaptive biology. What exactly are these psychological hazards you encountered? Captain Jax met his gaze, his own expression carefully neutral. We experienced shared hallucinations, Admiral, a form of high-yield infrasound emitted by the planetary core. It induces intense paranoia and suggestibility. It nearly tore us apart. We were fortunate to escape with our sanity. It is not a place for science, it is a trap for the mind. He did not lie. He simply translated an unimaginable truth into a clinical, palatable fiction. The planet was a psychological hazard, its very nature a threat to any rigid, possessive worldview. Some truths are not meant for ledgers and resource assessments. The real secret they now carried was not the location of a world, but the weight of a responsibility, the solemn duty to protect a fragile, cosmic miracle from the very curiosity that defined their own species. They would become the guardians of a silent border, their shared experience a wall against the coming tide of explorers, corporations, and colonists who would see only a prize to be won, not a person to be respected. The docking clamps of Mars Station sealed around the venture with a final, resonant thud. The familiar sounds of human industry echoed through the hull, a stark contrast to the planet's harmonic hum that still lingered in their memories. The crew stood together in the airlock, a silent, shared understanding passing between them. They were home, yet none of them would ever truly be the same. Captain Jax looked at each of them, Lyra with her new, quiet patience, Kale with his thoughtful gaze, Lena with the fire of a new purpose in her eyes, and Reyes, whose warrior's stance had softened into that of a sentinel. We went to the edge of understanding, Jax said, his voice quiet but firm, and we found something greater than monsters or machines. We found a consciousness learning to become something better, and we helped it find its way. It was not a victory speech, but a quiet affirmation of the impossible choice they had made. They had not conquered a world. They had forged a relationship with it, and in doing so had redefined their own. The experience left them not with easy answers, but with profound and humbling questions. What is life, if it can wear the skin of a planet? What is our purpose, if not to seek out other minds, not to conquer, but to connect? They stepped out onto the station, greeted by the noise and light of humanity, but each carried a piece of the silent, violet world within them, a constant reminder that the universe is far stranger and far more wonderful than they had ever dared to imagine, and that their next journey was already waiting in the quiet spaces between the stars.